Thank you. Thank you. Wish you the same. And today's Master of Ceremonies is Miss Parvati Ramchandran, right from Trivandrum, Kerala, the down south of India.
Okay.
So,
Thank you,
which
Lord,
is
sir. Thank you, Lord, sir.
so we welcome you as the Master of Ceremonies. So we
Thank you,
have
Lord, sir.
people
My
round the
privilege.
corner, and at the same time, I'm really grateful to Professor Dilip Barad, who has made it live streaming on YouTube. So the people, those who are unable to reach us, they can watch us on YouTube. So Professor Dilip Barad, a great honor for us, and really we are thankful to you for your generosity and help.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
We have our next speaker, means on next Sunday, we are having Professor Dilip Barad as our guest speaker. So today he is here to listen to Professor Bill Ashcroft. And most of us are waiting to listen to Professor Bill. And he's so generous, he's so kind. The very first moment I sent him the email, he was ready to respond. And all the time he was responding and he was interacting with us. And indeed, it's a great thing to know about most of the theories and most of the things what Professor Bill has written about. So indeed, a great opportunity for all of us here in iSPELL, and also Professor Ashcroft. Many of the people throughout the world, they have joined through YouTube, and the link has been shared to the people.
That's great. Thank you. So what's the order of proceedings?
Yeah, right now, just 1 minute is there.
1
so,
minute. Okay.
yeah. I'll start with the introduction of the Master of Ceremonies, and then Master of Ceremonies will take the charge.
Okay.
Hope everything is good at Australia as far as COVID-19 is concerned.
It is, yes. We have only had 20 cases in South Australia, but we've had none in the rest of the country.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so we have basically no cases at the moment. But anyone who comes in from overseas has to quarantine.
Right.
We've got a pretty...
Right.
Well, I'll be talking about borders later, but we have a very hard border as far as COVID's concerned.
But this COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to come beyond the boundaries and borders and to reach you in a different way.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's given us an advantage.
Absolutely, sir. So a warm good morning to each and everyone, those who have joined us on iSPELL's platform, Indian Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature. It welcomes you to the talk on post-colonialism today by Professor Bill Ashcroft. Indeed, it's a great opportunity for iSPELL to have Professor Bill Ashcroft on the platform of iSPELL. Friends, we are having our 10th program today. iSPELL came into existence on 5th of September 2020, and till then, we are proceeding towards the academic events of iSPELL. And today is the 10th event of iSPELL. And indeed, it's an honor to welcome Professor Bill Ashcroft on the platform of iSPELL. I'm really thankful to him for providing us wonderful opportunity to listen to him. At the same time, I welcome Dr. Jyoti Patil, the president of iSPELL, as the chairperson of today's talk, and Parvati Ramchandran, the master of ceremonies of today's event. Let me introduce Dr. Parvati Ramchandran. Parvati Ramchandran hails from Kerala, Trivandrum, which is at the down south of India, and she works in TKMM College, Nangiyar Kulangara, Kerala, as assistant professor of English. She has presented several papers in the national and international conferences, and the great thing to her credit is she has recently published an anthology of poems called as Late Night Lantern, which was released by the governor of Kerala. So indeed, a grand educator, a good human being, at the same time, a learner of literature. Parvati Ramachandran, the entire stage is yours now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord, sir. Thank you, Lord, sir. It's indeed a great privilege for me to be part of this and to be the person for the day to host the event. And good morning to one and all. Have a wonderful day ahead. And today we are having the 10th session where we have the most privileged session of the iSPELL having go on with a talk on post-colonialism today. So we have with us Professor Bill Ashcroft, who is a Professor Emeritus from the University of South Wales, Australia, Sydney, Australia. And the chairperson of the day is none other than Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am, who is the president of iSPELL India. And again, we have with us the captain of the ship always, Dr. Ganesham sir. Without you, nothing else is possible. We cannot have a long journey in a wonderful way without you, sir. And again, I have to welcome Professor Dilip Bharat, who have taken the venture to have the live telecast of the show. And and to all the participants and the scholars, the delegates, all who are present here, welcome you all to the grand talk on post-colonialism today by the great master of the theory, none other than Professor Bill Ashcroft. We welcome you, sir, and I hope all of you will be following the etiquette that should be followed throughout the event. And we welcome you, sir. Thank you lots.
Thank you very much. Shall I begin?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about post-colonialism today. It's had a very interesting journey since 1989 when the Empire Rights Act was published. And I want to talk about it because it's constantly changing and developing. But first, let's go back to clearing up what is post-colonial theory. Well, it's that branch of contemporary theory that investigates and develops propositions about the cultural and political impact of European conquest upon colonized societies and the nature of those societies' responses. So there's two aspects to it. It's the analysis of the impact of European colonization, and that's where Edward Said's Orientalism comes in, but it's also the examination of those societies' responses, and particularly in literature, and that's where the Empire Rights Act comes in. Now, a lot of people get confused and excited about the post and post-colonial, but the term, if anything, refers to post-invasion and not post-independence. It identifies neither a chronology nor a specific ontology. There's no one way of being post-colonial. It's not after colonialism, nor is it a way of being. Post-colonial is, above all, a way of reading. So it's a reading practice that draws attention to the profound and continuing effects of colonization upon literary production, upon anthropological accounts, historical records, and scientific and administrative writing. But above all, it is a reading of post-colonial literatures. And that's what I'm most interested in, and for particular reasons, which I'll explain. Now, post-colonial theory, the post-colonial stable, if you like, is what I call a convivial critical democracy. It embraces a wide range of different approaches and different specializations. It looks at the operations of language, of racism, of ethnicity, and various other aspects of colonial existence. But it is convivial, coming from the Latin convivere, to live with. Different theorists live with each other, and interestingly, even those theorists who critique the term are embraced into the critical democracy of post-colonialism. So around the 1990s, the language of post-colonialism drove the cultural turn in globalization. Now, there was a cultural turn that occurred, and that was because people they realized that the old models of development theory and sociology just didn't work. Now, Simon Gicandi has made an interesting comment on this, and he said that these two, post-colonialism and globalization, are similar. They have at least two important things in common. Firstly, they're concerned with explaining forms of social and cultural organization whose ambition is to transcend the boundaries of the nation state. And secondly, they seek to provide new ways to understand cultural flows that can no longer be explained by a homogeneous Eurocentric narrative of development and social change. So the development of post-colonialism in the 90s was one that went intersected, if you like, not exactly hand in hand, but intersected globalization studies. And both have had a lot to give to each other, because post-colonialism doesn't simply refer to 19th century British imperialism. It has models, it has techniques, it has tools to help us understand the operation of power in the world today. Now, around the turn of the century, there were a plethora of ideas about the future of post-colonial studies. And there are many themes that intersect with the field. There's the study of transnational literatures, the study of transculturalism, which is a very, very interesting term that originated in South America, was brought into post-colonial studies by the idea of the contact zone. I forget the, Mary, she's just slipped my mind, but transculturalism is a meeting of the dominated and dominating in a contact zone where both are changed. Mary Louise Pratt brought it into post-colonial studies. Now, there's also multiple modernities. Very often we think of modernity as a wave that spread out from Europe and washed across the world. But in fact, what post-colonial studies are showing is that modernities arose coevally. They arose in different places with different histories at different times. And this is an extremely important observation, because it shows that the movement of European imperialism across the world was not one that was absolute and couldn't be contested. Now, of course, world literature is something that is on everyone's lips at the moment. And of course, there's an interesting and tense relationship with post-colonialism, because world literature is profoundly Eurocentric in its origins. And the question is, well, what world are we talking about? For instance, in any discussion of world literature, Australia and New Zealand literatures are not included. So, of course, there's cosmopolitanism too. Cosmopolitanism is an interesting thing, because it has an ethical basis that I am greatly attracted to. But cosmopolitanism is an extremely wide term, and it doesn't take account of those people for whom even modernity hasn't occurred. So it's easy to make the world your city if you have the means of travel. So, and also the idea of the post-colonial sacred and post-colonial eco-criticism, these are all ideas that have been coming into post-colonial orbit. So the continuing relevance of post-colonial analysis lies in this, that the empires of cultural, technological, and economic power and their colonizing effects are amenable to the study, the post-colonial study, the techniques and strategies that it's developed. And so in one sense, neither imperialism nor colonialism have ended. And of course, that exercises a lot of people because they say, how can you say post-colonial? But as I've said before, it's post-invasion, it's a way of reading, and it's not after independence or after colonialism, because colonialism continues into the present. And so what I want to talk about today is, how am I developing post-colonial studies? Well, there are three things I want to talk about: post-colonial utopianism, borders and bordering, and the concept of the transnation. Now, the post-colonial utopianism is a very interesting phenomenon. The Utopian Study Society was formed in 1988. The Empire Writes Back formed in 1989. But, you know, the two have had nothing really to do with each other until very recently. And the book that I have recently published, Postcolonial Utopianism and Postcolonial Literatures, really talks about this. So the real driving force of this was Ernst Bloch's magisterial The Principle of Hope. It was translated in 1986 into English. It was written between 1938 and 1947, very interesting time when Adolf Hitler was ruling the West. And so there was a very great need for a sense of hope, a sense of a different kind of future. And the most recent exponent of this is Frederick Jameson's The Archaeologies of the Future. And it's important to recognize that there's a very great difference between utopia and utopianism. You know, utopia is often used as a derogatory term. People say you're just a utopian, which means you've got your head in the clouds, you're wishful thinking, you know, a vain idea of a perfect world. So there's a difference between the placeless place of Thomas More's Utopia and the spirit of hope, between the representation of utopia and the anticipatory function of utopianism. So the utopia of the place probably can never exist, but utopianism is absolutely critical. It's what Lyman Tower Sargent calls social dreaming. And Ruth Levitas says the desire for a better way of living expressed in the description of a different kind of society that makes that alternative way of life possible. And so this is the key. This is the key to post-colonial utopianism. We often think of colonial resistance in terms of opposition and violence, but in fact, the most powerful form of resistance was the transformation of the technologies and discourses of the colonial rulers. And the transformation of these things led to the idea that a different kind of future is possible. And, you know, without a concept of a different kind of future, without imagining the future, it's impossible to effectively resist. It's possible to, as Said says, speak truth to power. But, you know, there's a very great irony in post-colonial utopia, because when you read Thomas More's book, Utopia, we see King Utopus invades the land of the Abraxas, changes its name, civilizes the indigenous inhabitants, and cultivates the natural wasteland. Now, here you have a model, a classic model for the operation of colonialism itself. So Utopia, Thomas More's Utopia, was the consequence of an imperial and colonizing movement, a colonizing invasion. So it's extremely, ambivalent, I guess, at the idea of post-colonial utopianism, but it really is explained by the notion of the anticipatory function of literature. And this is why I think literature is so important, so valuable in the anticipation of the future. For Ernst Bloch, art and literature had unprecedented importance in imaging a different world. And, you know, Ben Okri says writers are the dream mechanism of the human race, which puts it beautifully. Now, for Bloch, the anticipatory illumination or Vorschein, or foreseeing of art and literature, the revelation of possibilities for rearranging social and political relations to produce Heimat. Now, Heimat is a very interesting term. It's the home we've all sensed, but never experienced or known. It's Heimat as utopia that determines the truth content of a work of art. Now, Heimat, of course, was a term that's being used by the Nazis as the home, the Blutenboden, the home of the Aryan race. And so here you've got Ernst Bloch, Jewish Marxist, taking that term and making it refer to something entirely different. The idea of the home that we've not experienced, but the home we sense, that possibility that lies in the future. Now that has been the possibility, the driving force of decolonisation. And it remains a driving force within the literature because the idea of a different world never comes to conclusion. And the idea of a different world is particularly presented in literature. It's not that, you know, literature is necessarily always optimistic or utopian in itself, but it has the capacity to imagine a different kind of world. And the imagination is absolutely critical in helping us to understand and formulate the possibility of liberation and freedom. Now, Heimat is that home that we haven't sensed but lies up ahead. And for Bloch, Heimat always lies beyond the border. And that's that brings the second thing I want to see post-colonialism, the direction of post-colonialism moving. The second direction, borders and bordering. This goes a lot better, I think, when I maximised it and I bring in each point by itself, but this will have to do. But I want us to think about what the world would look like without borders. Now just think for a minute. What kind of world would it be? I mean, we could quite possibly think about the erosion of borders between states in India and Australia, but what would the world look like without national borders? And we realise that, of course, it probably couldn't happen. It would be a totally different world. Now, borders have been increasing at a great pace. At the end of the World War II, there were 7 border walls. When the Berlin Wall fell, there were 15 border walls. And today, there are 77 border walls or fences. And this is the way we think of borders. We think of borders as walls designed to keep asylum seekers out. The most notorious, perhaps at the moment, being that wall between that unfinished wall between the United States and Mexico. But walls and fences, these are the ways we understand the idea of the border. But let's think about what a border actually is. A border is not a thing, but a practice. Now, very often it makes its impression on us in terms of a structure, but a border is a practice. It's both a consequence and production of power relationships. And that practice is something that stimulates the utopian vision of a possibility, of a high map beyond the border. And I look at the border wall between Israel and the West Bank, between Israel and Palestine. And obviously here is a very interesting demonstration of the utopian vision of a people who are hemmed in by a wall that's been built to enclose them and keep them away from various kinds of water sources. I won't go into the intricate way in which the Israel wall has been built, but what I'm interested in is this depiction of a tropical island that lies beyond the wall, through the wall, painted on it by somebody, and somebody who sees the possibility of life beyond the wall. And in a sense, this utopian vision is a disruption of the idea of the border itself. And so it's a very interesting image because it brings together two of the things that I'm seeing post-colonialism moving towards. The idea of possibility, the utopianism that gives us hope. And you know, Ernst Bloch said, utopia may be a fantasy, but without hope, we cannot live. And that hope is something that has driven post-colonial literatures. Now, in Kavafy's Waiting for the Barbarians, it's a poem that, as you know, was the stimulation for Coetzee's Waiting for the Barbarians. It says, why this sudden restlessness and confusion? How serious people's faces have become. Why are the streets and squares emptying so rapidly? Everyone going home so lost in thought. Because night has fallen and the barbarians have not come. And some who have just returned from the border say, there are no barbarians any longer. Now, what will become of us without barbarians? They were those people, kind of solution. Now, this brilliantly captures, as perhaps only poetry can do, the complex role that borders have. You know, the barbarians, the others, those who exist beyond our borders, they're the ones who, because of their difference, help us to understand who we are. They are a kind of solution because they demonstrate who we are not. And that gives us some kind of purchase on the idea of self, and in particular on the myth of national self. And so borders have had this function ever since the treaties of Westphalia, which established the nation state. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But this poem shows us that borders are unfortunately very important. They're very important to the state. They're very important in helping people understand or think that they understand who they are by defining who they're not. Now, borders, because borders are a practice, they don't just go around the outside of the state. And Mitchell says the boundary of the state never marks a real exterior. It's a line drawn internally within the network of institutional mechanisms through which a certain social and political order is maintained. So what he's saying is that if you realize that borders are not structures, but practices, we see these bordering practices extending within the nation state. And these include rules, laws, restrictions, surveillance, and more subtle forms of pressure, such as nationalistic rhetoric. And of course, the issue of surveillance is a critical one today, because state after state is using the alibi of national security to keep their populations under surveillance. And that surveillance itself is a form of border that keeps the population in control. Now, in terms of the national identity, if you like, in terms of being a member of a nation state, Simonson gives 8 borders or boundary markers as criteria for national membership. There's national ancestry, being of the national religion, birth on the country's soil, having lived in the country for most of one's life, language skills, respect for the country, laws and institutions, having host national citizenship and feeling as part of the nation. Now, if you look at those boundary markers, you'll realise that there are many, many people that they exclude. People who regard themselves as members of the nation. People such as migrants and asylum seekers, refugees in particular, but also Indigenous people. And well, for a very long time, women, and all seem to be, in terms of one border or another, excluded from national membership. So these things are extremely interesting in terms of the way in which the nation state operates. And it's the literature is incredibly important in overcoming these borders. In Step Across This Line, Salman Rushdie says, good writing assumes a frontierless nation. Writers who serve frontiers have become border guards. In our deepest natures, we are frontier-crossing beings. We know this by the stories we tell ourselves, for we are storytelling animals too. So in other words, what he's saying is that stories, literature, writing, these are ways in which we cross borders. These are ways in which the nation state fails to be able to control us. And the imagination is something that can't be bordered. And that's for Ernst Bloch and for writers in a sense. This is why literature is so powerful and so important. Now, Edward Said, who had a lot to say about exile, and he said, exile is both the mind of winter and the invigorating condition of the public intellectual's engagement with regimes of identity control, such as nation, religion, culture, and ethnicity. So by mind of winter, he meant that, you know, the exile feels cold and in some respects abandoned. But while it gives you the sense of loss and a sense of perhaps being away from home, it's also, as he says, it gives the public intellectual the invigorating power to engage regimes of identity control. So while exile is a difficult thing to experience, nevertheless, in Said's terms, all the great public intellectuals of the last century or so have been exiles, have been migrants, have been border crossers. And it's interesting to think about that. But whether they are physically border crossers, you know, refugees or migrants or whatever, all writers are border crossers. And the creative spirit for which literature is a powerful metonym is the ultimate border crosser. You see, it's inherently post-national because its tendency is not to belong. the nationality of literature as being a function of reading rather than writing. So there's a lot of discussion about the post-national these days. And there's a lot of argument about it, because some people who support the idea of the nation say it's a way in which people's human rights can be maintained and protected. But in fact, what we see, if we separate the nation, that's the multiplicity, the ethnic multiplicity of the nation, we see that separated from the structures of the state, then we see a very different situation, because literature is being a border crosser, crosses the borders of the nation, crosses the borders of the state. It makes a specialty of not belonging. So again, let's remind ourselves of Ockery, writers of the dream mechanism of the human race, and those dreams always cross borders. Now Rushdie says again, the crossing of borders of language, geography and culture, the examination of the permeable frontier between the world of things and deeds and the world of the imagination, the lowering of the intolerable frontiers created by the world's many different kinds of thought police, these matters have been at the heart of the literary project. So, HIMAP, the home that we've not yet experienced, but the one that is always there, is not the nation, but it is the horizon of possibility. And that horizon of possibility is the possibility of the people, the inhabitants of the nation, being able to circulate around the borders of the state. Those borders, the internal borders of the state, the multiple ways of surveilling and controlling the populations of different states. So that leads me to talk about another concept, and that is the transnation. Now, all these subjects, all these citizens moving around the borders of the state, the nation has always tried to identify a certain identity for itself. Now, in young nations such as Australia, this becomes almost an obsession. As it grows, people are obsessed with the idea of Australian national identity, and probably in India too, the idea of national identity is something that that people can't escape, really, whether they're drawn to it or not. But this picture shows the actual multiplicity of a nation, of the different strands that go to make it. You could put it in another way, that a nation is a big tossed salad. A tossed salad doesn't have an identity, a single strand running through it, but it's made up of many, many different factors, features, ethnicities, peoples. And this I call the transnation, because that multiplicity is inherently mobile. It's mobile, and it has the capacity to move around the borders of the state. Now, this brings in the post-colonial approach to the nation, and post-colonialism has always seen the nation, even the post-independence nation, as a disappointment, and the nation itself as something that is wanting. In Africa, for instance, Soyinka says that Africa was carved up like some demented tailor who paid no attention to the fabric, colour or pattern of the quilt he was patching together. So we see that this is true of all post-colonial states, that they occupy the colonial boundaries. So the colonial boundaries become the boundaries of the state. And this is true of pretty much every former colony. In a place like Australia, of course, there, as a former Prime Minister once said, that when they were handing out continents, there weren't too many going around, but Australia got one. And the outline of this island continent forms the border. Now, whereas post-colonial thinkers have been critical of the state, even J.M. Hobson, who wrote in his major tome called Imperialism, he said, empire-bred nationalism undermined the chance of true internationalism. But Partha Chatterjee has a even more interesting observation, and that nationalism undermines the progress of decolonisation because the national form is hostile to the cultures of the colonised people. And he says that while it reverses the problematic of Orientalism, by which, you know, the Asian, the Oriental, is passive and backward, it still operates within the Orientalist thematic, which is the post-Enlightenment structure of science, knowledge, and reason. And so, you know, the nation itself, the idea of the nation is a deeply Eurocentric concept because it took form in the Treaties of Westphalia in 1628, and it has been the way in which Europe came to understand its bordering practices. And so the idea of the nation is deeply Eurocentric and therefore quite an ambiguous thing for decolonising peoples to aim towards. But the nation, the idea of the independent nation, this was what decolonising peoples with resistance people saw as their goal. And what happened? That this wonderful utopian ideal turned out to be something that was simply taken over by the elites, taken over by all kinds of people who simply stepped into the architecture of the colonial state. And so the post-colonial utopianism has constantly critiqued the idea of the nation state, but also the idea of nationalism itself. And Tagore and Gandhi have been prominent in this. They have critiqued the idea of nationalism as something that I think both understood was something that came from outside and was imposed on the people. Now it's a very ambivalent sort of situation because Tagore's poetry became the basis of both the Bangladeshi and Indian national anthems. Gandhi became a secular saint whose influence was very important for Nehru to establish the independent Indian state. So these things are surrounded by complexity and by ambiguity and ambivalence. But the transnation is that mobile people who circulate around those structures, whether they're internal or external. So it is the fluid migrating outside of the state that begins within the nation. A way of talking about subjects who circulate around the bordering practices of the state. So the transnation is outside the state in the sense that it has the capacity, the mobility to move around the bordering practices of the state, whatever they may be. And it's a way of talking about subjects who circulate around these bordering practices. So the transnation is in a sense simply the nation, but I say it's transnation because its capacity is ultimately mobile. Its capacity for mobility is unmatched. Now, I've written about this, and there's several sort of theoretical antecedents to it, but one, perhaps the most prominent, most convincing, is Deleuze-Guattari's idea of smooth and striated space. Now, striated space is, as it sounds, structured. It has a clear warp and woof, and this is the way in which it's like a cloth where the textile is very clear. And this is the way in which the state operates. But around, in between and beyond that is smooth space. Smooth space is like felt. It's rolled rather than woven. And so smooth space is the space of the transnation, and it operates in contention with, around, circumventing the structures of the state. Now, Scott says that, the transnation can realize itself in terms of infrapolitics, the undramatic, everyday and mundane acts of quiet evasion, slowdowns, false compliance, feigned ignorance and sabotage carried out by factory workers, that when performed by many, change or alter a landscape of power. Now, since Black Lives Matter and the protests have been going on in all around the world, there's been a lot of study of the ways in which successful protest operates, and it operates, non-violent protest operates very effectively by withdrawing your labour, withdrawing your service, withdrawing your custom from the economy. So there's various ways in which non-violent protests can work, and this is the operation of the transnation, and it operates to change the scene, the political scene, but it also represents a tremendous threat to the state, because it is the constant capacity of the transnation to circumvent the bordering practices of the state. And in a sense, those bordering practices are all the state has got going for it. But it is the demonstration of the transnation's mobility and ability to get around the, if you like, imperial structures of the state and the colonizing operation of their borders. And the creative spirit is the ultimate border crosser. Because as we've been seeing with the idea of utopianism, the idea of writing as a dream mechanism of the human race, as Salman Rushdie's been urging, we see that the creative spirit, and in particular literature, is the ultimate border crosser, because literature can't be trapped into nationality. It can't be trapped into a sense of its national identity. So these three things, the idea of utopianism, the operation of the borders of the state, and the movement of the transnation around those borders. These are the ways I see postcolonialism moving, the way in which I want to see it move. So thank you very much. Now we have time for a few questions.
Parvati?
Yes, sir. The talk was done, and it was.
You can invite.
Yes, sir. Yes.
You can invite.
Jyoti Patel, ma'am. Yes, Jyoti Patel, ma'am, to chair the session, please. You are welcome.
No. You can invite some questions, Parvati.
Okay. Sorry, sir. We have a set of questions given here. The first question is from Dr. Chandra Shekhar Sharma, and the question goes this way. Can I have the question? Can
Yes,
I give the
please.
question, please? Yes. With new
Yes.
strategical economical interest sprouting up in some countries like China, do you think colonialism will be back? With new
Okay.
strategical economical interest sprouting up in some countries like China, do you think colonialism will be back?
I don't think colonialism has gone away. Now, I would say that China is an empire parading as a nation. It's an empire with 32 different races and ethnicities. It is an empire that has unprecedented control over its population. And there are evidence of Chinese writers who are crossing the borders. It's a very, very dangerous and difficult thing in China. But there's two answers to this question. Firstly, colonialism hasn't really gone away if you think of it in the broader sense of economic and cultural colonialism. But also, where China's concerned, I say that it's very much an empire parading as a nation. So this is why post-colonial studies, why post-colonialism in general continues to be relevant, because the colonial impetus, the imperial impetus of states remains very strong. And so post-colonial theorists can bring the strategies of post-colonial studies to bear upon the contemporary world. Now, we think of it in mainly in terms of neoliberal capitalism as being the great empire of the present. But there are various kinds of empires. And, you know, while globalization studies sees the nation as separate from global interest or global economy, in fact, the nation state is the important structure to, in a sense, motivate the operations of the global economy. So, yeah, colonialism not only won't come back, it hasn't left us.
So it was just one question left with us.
No, any other queries? People are there.
No,
if they want to ask any
they
question,
Can I ask
so
a
they can
question,
unmute
sir?
and
no, let them ask.
Hello.
Yep.
Ghanshyam, sir, I would
Yeah,
like
please
to ask
unmute
a
yourself
question.
and ask.
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, I must congratulate iSPELL on organizing such an insightful lecture. And this presentation of Dr. Bill Ashcroft was insightful. I have a question that I was especially impressed. I was especially impressed by that the literature cannot be trapped into nationalities or national borders. But sometimes this literature gets into the political traps and also falls under the traps within regionalism or the religion. So how to cope with that sort of a thing that creeps into literature, saving it from the traps? Yes.
Well, thanks for that question, because it's something that I'm very interested in.
Professor Ashcroft, can you
Yeah.
please switch on your video and stop sharing, because we can see you then.
Oh, okay. Stop presenting. Okay. How's that?
Now we can see you. Right.
All right.
Right.
Now, I find this question very, very significant, very important. You know, national identity is not written into literature. You know, a writer doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I think I want to write a great Indian novel or a great Australian novel. I want to, the nationality of a text is read into it by the institutions of reading, whether it's the academy, whether it's a prize-giving organisation, whether it's individual readers and critics. But this is very true of something like Australian literature. and it's true also of Indian literature. Now, when you say, does literature fall into the trap? I think the trap is open for literature all the time by people who read it in a particular way. And nevertheless, writers avoid the trap. They have a vision of possibility and they can imagine a different kind of world. But there's always this tension between what the writer is writing and what the institutions of reading are determining is its national identity.
So hope it's clear. Can we have some more questions?
Any other query?
It's not in the chat box, but anyone want? It's not in the chat box, sir. No questions are there in the chat box. If anyone wants to ask a question,
you can ask. Dr. Murali Krishnan?
The participants.
Dr. Barat?
So can I have a question, please?
Yes, Dr. Barat. Yeah, Dr. Barat is there. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Barat, please.
Thanks, Professor Bill Ashcroft, for a very interesting insight into various aspects of how today we can look at the post-colonial discourse. We have a paper on post-colonial discourse, and we deal with this paper also. What our students are normally interested nowadays is they keep on asking question about how we look at pandemic and post-colonial studies. So what are the dynamics that are emerging, or how can we look at these things? One of the concerns was that it was the first world which is much affected, like America, European countries, then the third world, which was expected. In the WHO guidelines, it was expected that this will be havoc on third world poor countries. But what we are seeing is something different. So what are your views on pandemic and post-colonial studies?
Well, I think the whole idea of post-colonial eco-criticism is a very, very strong one. I mean, that whole theme. And, you know, the spread of weeds, the spread of ecological travesty has been pushed by the imperial control of the world since the last century. So what we're seeing today is an operation of the significance of transport, the idea of the dangerous potential of a cosmopolitan world. But you're quite right that the rich nations have a greater capacity to fight this pandemic than poorer nations, simply for simple economics, because they can't afford the equipment to do it. Now, this is this doesn't take into account the possibility that the richest nation in the world may have a president who is completely incompetent. And that means that the richest nation in the world, the nation whose empire spreads around the world, is the one which has the greatest number of deaths. So it's something that doesn't divide easily into the colonized and colonizing situation, except to say that in terms of the global economy, this is where the rich and poor nations show a very different susceptibility to the pandemic. And the rich nations are busily trying to get a vaccine going, but whether that vaccine will be distributed to the poor nations of Africa, for instance, is another question. So it's an interesting So yeah. Anyway, I think it's something we need to think about, because the idea of empire and colonialism has now morphed into the neoliberal economy and rich and poor nations, and this is where the damage of the pandemic is going to be seen.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And we
Sir,
have one more question from Dr. Yeah, please.
Sir, I'm Dr. Shivanaz. Thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture. Sir, I want to ask that this post-colonialism, in post-colonialism era, many terms has arisen like first world, second world, third world, fourth world countries. So division of the world in this kind is also a kind of imperialism, a part of imperialism.
There's something that we really need to recognize about post-colonial writing, and that is when someone like Ngugi wa Thiong'o says that to write in English means that your mind is colonized, he overlooks the fact that post-colonial writers took hold of the language, of the English language, and transformed it. They transformed it into something that was could represent themselves. And so by appropriating that language, transforming it, they changed the nature of English literature itself. So I think it's misguided to see literature as stuck in a kind of colonial time warp, because what happens is that post-colonial writers, by taking hold of that language, transformed not just the language, but English literature itself. And so while we think of, people who study English literature as being in some way colonized, we forget that writers such as Indian writers taking that language and transforming it really transformed the whole landscape of literary studies. As you know, this all came about after the Macaulay's Minute to Parliament, where he said, if we're to teach Indian elites, we should teach them in English. And there was a struggle between the Orientalists and the Anglicists, and the Anglicists won. But what they could never have foreseen was that these people whom they taught English took hold of the language, transformed it in the sort of influence of their own mother tongue, and then began to transform English literature itself. So it's a fantastic demonstration of transformation, and so that's why I think that the whole notion of continuing to be colonized needs to be examined carefully, because what writers have shown us is that the imagination is incredibly powerful, and the capacity to take the tools of empire and transform them to make them work for you is something that is ongoing.
Sir, even the term Commonwealth is also a result of colonization, Commonwealth literature.
Commonwealth, yes, but we all know Commonwealth's idea that Commonwealth literature doesn't exist, and I probably agree with him. I don't think post-colonial literature exists as something, you could say is a field of literature. I want to say post-colonialism is a way of reading, and it's a way of reading those texts of colonized and formerly colonized people, and a way of reading their form, the tools of power. Now, there's a number of other questions down here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have another question from Dr. Murali Krishnan. Do you think literary awards have taken up the idea of post-colonial studies seriously now?
I don't
Should I
think.
repeat the question?
Well, yes. I think that.
Do you?
I think
Yes, sir. Please.
literary awards are more geared towards the nation state rather than the idea of post-colonial reading. But there are many texts that we would call post-colonial that win prizes, and of course, you know, people wonder whether this is sort of tokenism, but I don't think so. I think it doesn't matter what you know literary awards are given out. What matters is the way in which you read the political operation of these texts, and that's the thing that has a capacity to change the landscape of power, as I've said. Now, has the pandemic neutralised the superior identity of the colonised in terms of America? Certainly, and do you think that globalization and new global economic relationships will ameliorate racism? I'm afraid not.
Okay, sir.
The question is, do you think that globalization and new global economic relationships will ameliorate racism? I'd say two things.
Yes.
That nationalism and racism go hand in hand. And wherever you have a nation state that is bolstered by the excesses of nationalism, then you will always find racism. We see that in every country. And so this is the danger of the nation state, I think, that not only can't avoid racism, but the two go hand in hand. Because one of the things about nationalism is that there are certain kind of person belongs, and the rest are barbarian. So I think it's up to post-colonial writers to ameliorate racism. What I think will happen, the problems of America are not simply problems of racism; they're problems of slavery, and those problems of slavery have where each of the states was a separate colony, but they're relatively trivial compared to the Balkan War or Rwanda.
Yeah, Professor
Yes, sir.
Ashcroft, there is a question from Dr. Yogananda, who has asked, if colonialism never left, then independence never came. Would this be connected with the rise of right wing all over the world?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Independence never came, colonialism never left. I guess what that's talking about is the continued operation of global power upon countries. And in globalization, in the global world today, no country is truly dependent in the sense of being separate from global flows and from global economy. So that is certainly true. I have a question down here. Can I please answer Kurti Kiwani's question, which is, can you suggest some topics on post-colonialism for future research for our youngsters? Well, where do you start? I think, for a start, you research a topic that you're excited about. But certainly the topic experiments of imperial control. Imperial control itself transforms itself, becomes a different kind of thing. So, what I say is that topics for research are those that excite you. And I'm excited by utopianism, borders, and transnation. So,
It's almost,
Parvati, we can
almost,
ask the person.
yeah.
All right.
Almost the questions are done, and I hope it was very much cleared by Professor Bill Ashcroft. Thank you, sir. And now we will go on to Dr. Jyoti Patel ma'am to chair the session, please. And she's a right person out here who is the president of iSPELL and the principal of Renuka College, Nagpur, with a vast 30 years of experience in both academics and administrative sectors. Ma'am, please to chair the session and to have a few words with us. Jyoti Patel ma'am.
Please unmute yourself, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, madam. It's my proud privilege to chair such an insightful and informative session. As Henry David Thoreau admitted, we are all of us Apollo serving some Adventists. Honorable Chief Speaker, Professor Bill Ashcroft, FAHA Professor Emeritus, School of Arts and Media, UNSW, University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia, and my dear Toastmaster of today's literary treat, Ms. Parvati Ramchandran, and all the respected iSPELL office bearers and equally enthusiastic and intelligent member participants. Very warm, winsome, and wonderful afternoon. I'm immensely pleased to chair such an enthralling and highly educative deliberation by Professor Ashcroft. Robert Frost says, a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Similarly, lecture begins in delight and deliberation and ends in wisdom and insight. Sir, we are highly honored to have such an erudite scholar as an exponent and an exponent of post-colonial studies, the co-author of Empire Right Back, known as the first seminal text to examine systematically the concepts of post-colonial studies. And your other writings such as Post-Colonial Studies, Reader, Post-Colonial Studies, the key concepts, and post-colonial transformation, and on post-colonial futures, the Caribbean's voice, which you also talked about in Hamlet's form. And since you are working on the project, or perhaps you have completed it, Future Thinking, Utopianism in Colonial Literatures. And you today talked at length about it. Your immense knowledge and understanding in this field really made us see through your kaleidoscopic views regarding various important concepts like bordering, transnational literatures, neoliberalism, eco-criticism, transculturalism, multiple modern and post-colonial secrets. These can be the topics for new explorations or research and cosmopolitanism. When we try to understand the intricacies of English literary theories, especially in the 21st century, the constant interplay of homogenization and heterogenization in the digital era of internationalization of education, cross-cultural communication, what we call multicultural, technification of languages under the focus of the concept of globalization, it becomes pertinent to understand the present and unravel future directions. And I think, sir, you cleared all of the doubts and put forth a new vision to surge ahead with an open mind with your brilliant and incisive analysis of all new concepts. Beginning with an engagement of the global, or should I say local terms, such as world literatures, cosmopolitanism, translation, diaspora, and migrancy. As an established critic, you have demonstrated the ways in which post-colonial analysis continues to offer valuable ways of analyzing the pressing issues of a fast-changing world with resistance, subversion, and reconstruction, which are the significant features of post-colonial literature. You also talked about the future studies you have taken into consideration, utopianism, border and bordering, and transnationalism. You provided us with a different set of theoretical tools to unpack the complexities of the demonstrating your capacity to delineate the different approaches and methodologies to live together in a spirit of convivial democracy across regions, genres, and themes to suggest the many different directions in which the field is moving, like discourse, Eurocentric, foregrounding, hegemony, hybridity, intertextuality, modernity, mimicry, Orientalism, other, subaltern, expatriate, immigrants, multiculturalism, periphery, etc. You have offered a distinctive approach towards post-colonialism in today's perspective. Our well-known who revolutionized the field of post-colonialism, Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, whose essay in cultural politics, Can the Subaltern Speak, focuses on the other and the subaltern. Homi K. Bhabha's book, The Location of Culture, put forth the concept of hybridity as colonial representation. He also raises the question of cultural identity. Now we have crossed too far here for the identity crisis. He also uses the term mimicry to indicate westernization of native cultures. Bhabha also criticized Franz Fanon, who is one of the earliest writers associated with post-colonialism. Franz Fanon, in his book Black Skin, White Mask, asks about subjugations, and he talked about at length about subjugation and racial discrimination. R. Siva Kumar talks about alternate modernity. Derek Gray talks about colonial present. Amar Ashcroft in his Orientalism depicts the imbalance between the West and East, showing the superiority of West over the East, as you talked about the Eurocentrism. But we have to keep in mind here a line from a poem by Rudyard Kipling, "Oh, East and West is West. East is East and West is West. Never the twin shall." It continues, and after few lines later, he himself said, "But there is East nor West, when two strong men stand face to face." So I can see here Bill Ashcroft on one side and Dr. Ghansham sir on the one, standing face to each other. As sir, you termed it right, post-colonial transformation now breaks new theoretical grounds while demonstrating the relevance of a wide range theoretical practices and extending controversies in the field, particularly circulating around the term post-colonial itself continue unabated, but the relevance of neo-imperialism and the emerging from the engagements of post-colonial societies in a global age have demonstrated the, excuse me, I'm getting some calls continuously. I'm really sorry. And when you talk about this, you suggested three main future studies, and here these engagements of post-colonial societies in a global age have demonstrated the usefulness of post-colonial analysis. And sir, you have rightly started with a quote by Slavoj Zizek in your essay, The Function of Literature, Revolution, Transformation, and Utopia in 2015. I'm a pessimist in the sense that we are approaching dangerous times. But I am an optimist for exactly the same reason. Pessimism means things are getting messy. Optimism means these are times when change is possible. So optimism and pessimism, these are two areas, but we have to take the Milleristic way, the midway, and that's the crux of the matter today. I once again extend immense gratitude on behalf of iSPELL for accepting our humble request to spare your valuable time and share your views on this burning topic. You have made our day with your brilliant discourse. I also wish all our participants present digitally over here more such fruitful and mind-churning sessions ahead. And this really a wonderful counterparts. We have made a pass at the infinite. Thank you. Jai Bharat.
Well, thank you. It's very
Thank you,
kind.
Lords, ma'am. Now, Dr. Ganesham, sir, can we have the certificate, please?
Yes, indeed, it's an honor to have Professor Bill Ashcroft on the platform of iSPELL, and we were really spellbound. Basically, iSPELL has been constituted for this only, and the motto of iSPELL is facilitate to elevate. We are facilitating the fraternity to elevate themselves. And on the 10th talk of iSPELL, we have Professor Bill Ashcroft. Who can be better than Professor Bill Ashcroft for post-colonial studies? We have studied empire rights back, and we are back with Professor Bill Ashcroft. So hope to continue this kind of an academic session in the future also. At the same time, I would like to convey my gratitude to Professor Bill Ashcroft for presenting his wonderful talk on post-colonialism. And this is a token of appreciation and love from all of us to Professor Bill Ashcroft. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Bill Ashcroft, for sharing your valuable inputs on post-colonialism and valuable time for all of us. The entire fraternity is benefited a lot and immensely on post-colonial studies. We are indeed happy to have Professor Jyoti Patil, who has chaired the session and has brought so many things as far as the insight of post-colonialism is concerned. So this certificate goes to Dr. Jyoti Patil, the president of iSPELL. Thank you very much, ma'am. Hope you could see us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So thank you very much, ma'am. And indeed, it's an honor to have Master of Ceremonies in the form of Parvati Ramchandran, who has controlled entire session in a wonderful way. So Miss Parvati Ramchandran, this certificate is for you. Hope you could see this.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity. And now over to you, Parvati.
Thank you a lot, sir. Basically, I will have to start with a very personal note. I cannot interest till now how you could give such a big opportunity to me to to be master the ceremonies of this wonderful event. And it's not virtual for me. It's something turned to reality. In fact, at the time of COVID, having Professor Bill Ashcroft right in front of me, I remember the time I used to carry this book directly to my classrooms, being a student as well as a teacher. So it's something of reality turned to me, and I am deeply impressed by the quote he has given. Imagination can't be bordered. So let it be, sir, always. And thank you, Lord, sir, for your wonderful talk you delivered here. Something turned to a bigger reality. And thank you again. And now there is no words would suffice to thank the captain of the ship, Dr. Ganesham, who make all this possible. I cannot just compliment you, sir, for the efforts you take to run this boat. And thank you, sir. And again, Dr. Jyoti Patil, ma'am, the president of iSPELL, who is again the backbone, who is running again iSPELL in a better way. Thank you, ma'am, for chairing the session. And I cannot conclude without thanking Dr. Professor Dilip Barid, and who has taken the great opportunity to have the live stream of the session. And hopefully we are waiting to see you as a resource person for the next day. And thank you, Lords. It was a wonderful time having you all together. And special thanks to again Professor Bill Ashcroft once again from all of us. Thank you, Lords.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Keep safe, keep healthy, and we will see you sometime later. Thank you very much to all of you. Stay safe and stay healthy. Let us fight with COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you.